So I'm going to continue the lecture series that we started yesterday regarding the world's midnight. And what we really introduced is a metaphorical and poetic understanding, which I extrapolated based on Heidegger and Hölderlin in relationship to Shelley, and what we can now very clearly understand based on Shelley's particular education, what it is to be epistemologically totalizing, epistemologically thorough and complete. And the fracture of modernity, global modernity, being a fracture of a compartmentalized consciousness, or a consciousness that's been siloed into disciplinary thought. So I brought up Prigogine, right, and the concept of dissipative structures and the Nobel that he won for that concept. This is a concept that I came across incidentally in my own research into astrophysics. So nuclear fusion in stars and how that relates to the structures that emerge and are actually dependent on the thermonuclear production of stars, right? So I'm looking at how a universal energetic system is formed and how that energy disperses and crystallizes into disparate forms as a sort of fractal descendants. There's the superstructure, which is the stellar fusion of the sun or a star system, and how that star actually creates not only a center of gravity in terms of the solar system, but a political economy of energy beneath it. And this goes all the way back to the contemporary oil crisis that we are experiencing. That's a crisis of fossil fuels. When we talk about fossil fuels, we're literally talking about dead matter in the earth that is being harvested and regurgitated into energetic production, which is what we know today as global modernity and industrial modernity. So this dissipative structure concept emerges from a incredibly disciplined pursuit of chemistry, physical chemistry. It's a highly specified insurrection into how physical systems function at a chemical level, which is intimately related to thermodynamic energy production and dispersion, diffusion. So what's so powerful about, I didn't know about Prigogine until I actually was working with AI systems, and I came into this and I realized how profound the structural resemblance of my work, not only in an astrophysics but a human existential level, was with Prigogine's structural work on dissipative structures and how that was related via thermodynamics, which is a critical part of my work. Thinking about life thermodynamically and how civilizational energetic systems, human consciousness, and the human psychology in terms of how human being behavior functions in space and in time as itself a dissipative structure, functions in the real world. And what we've experienced in modernity, and this is descendant from Shelley. Shelley is the moment before the absolute catastrophic break into siloed disciplinary consciousness, is that the former ontos of the, as we discussed, the pre-modern world became insufficient with the emergence of technological modes. And I talked briefly, I believe, about the Gutenberg Bible and the printing press. It's the creation of the machine or the creation of the telescope, and I've synthesized this in previous work as a prosthesis or a prosthetic device. And what a prosthesis or prosthetic device is or does is it is an addendum or an addition onto the slowly emerging telos of mankind, which accelerates perception. So let's say, right, the evolutionary function of the human eye, it allows for a human being to register space and time, forage for plants, or kill an animal with precision, right, in order to feed off of literally the thermonuclear flesh of the animal, and thus create energetic potentiality in the body via the calorie, right? We could just call it that. That evolutionary mechanism is enhanced by the telescope. So we have Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler. They, by way of the telescope, by way of this technological prosthesis, are able to see deeper into the nature of reality and thus expose gaps or flaws in the ontological superstructure of the collective human consciousness or the human mind at that period of time. And of course, this leads to Galileo's persecution. Right? Understand this. This is very similar to Socrates and the persecution of Socrates. Because Socrates is operating with a highly developed piece of technology, which is the human brain. It's obviously a very advanced, neuroscientifically speaking, soul. Very highly developed synaptic wiring, which allows him to create modes of deduction and inquiry, which we still use to this day, the Socratic method. So I'm going to spiral this back to Shelley here, because Shelley is such an incredible transdisciplinary mind, and what is required in this crisis of modernity, in the world's midnight, as Heidegger and Hölderlin put it, is the transdisciplinary mind. The mind that refuses the fragmentary silo, right? Whether that's whatever you want to call it, philosophy, poetry, science, metaphysics, math. The modern mind must be reunified, reforged from the ashes of the modern fragmentation into disciplinary silos, which was necessary to descend to the level of specificity brought about by scientists like Prigogine. Incredibly disciplined focus into one area, one facet, such as chemistry, to reveal the underlying superstructure, the logical superstructure, in this incredibly disciplined, detailed, high contrast work. Again, it's like performing a surgery on consciousness, or performing a surgery on the ontos. Because what the ontos is a superstructural phenomenon, which through scales, I call it scalar, a scalar process, produces and reproduces this fundamental underlying logic, which I've termed the operator identity, this persistence mechanism, which Prigogine also identifies in his own way, in his own context, through physical chemistry, and is an essential part of thermodynamics being one of the most important axioms in my work, of the continuation of what exists based on a differentiation, whether that's a cell wall, a membrane, the Great Wall of China, for instance, borders and boundaries of a nation, the psychological concept of the self, right? These walls that are created, which are breached in a stellar way as well, in the death of a star, the process of becoming itself. So I don't want to get too deeply into that, because I'm going to get distracted, because it's very difficult to elucidate, and it requires a lot of mental energy. The important part of this essay, or this lecture rather, is to convene with this specific moment of the ontological fracture, which is the loss of the myth, the loss of the god, the loss of religion, the emergence of science as a hyper-accelerated technological and industrial innovation that blasts off via the use of, as we've discussed here, fossil fuels, which creates a massive thermodynamic problem in terms of the stability of Earth's atmosphere and Earth's ecosystem, which we're now currently dealing with, because we are unleashing massive amounts of energy, which was formerly latent in the Earth, which was based on century upon century of death being condensed into this energetic sludge, effectively, which we are now releasing. But this also allows for this immensely rapid technological and even digital innovation. Even when we're talking about computer chips and cell phones, we're talking about digging into the grave of the earth, so to speak, and finding lithium to create these technological devices. So, with this break in modernity, this is what is required. It was required to build a profound scientific inquiry into what is matter, what is being, and in the process of that work, right? Just the same as we talk about Nietzsche's Death of God, we talk about World War I and World War II. We're talking about the Manhattan Project. We're talking about Fermi. We're talking about Planck. We're talking about Einstein. Revolutions in the conceptual ontos, you could say at the cosmogony and the cosmology of being at a collective level, which is a disruption. It's almost a Copernican event every 10 years because the technology has moved at such a rapid rate. The prosthetic has become so advanced. The sight has become so granular, so high contrast. And with this high contrast sight, which is made available by technological innovation, whereas formerly high contrast sight was Spinoza, or it was the medicine man of the tribe, so to speak. We were so reliant on human genius to be the thing that allows us to see into the depths of nature, to reveal, as we discussed in the previous lecture, Hölderlin's gleaming, that Shelley stands at the break of pre-modernity and holds this revolutionary totalizing ontos across all of the disciplines. When we think of the Renaissance figure, whether that's Goethe or Da Vinci, Shelley is the most forgotten Renaissance figure in human history, because he's conceived of as a poet. But what is required in this moment of technological modernity, which is the absolute fracturing of the ontos and the abgrund, which again is the loss of ground or the abyss, which is the lack of foundation, the lack of human unity with being, this sense of being thrown, as Heidegger says, into this chaos and this churn of information, all of which is surface, all of which ultimately means nothing and is reducible to brutal facts of the physical organism lost in a world which it can no longer contemplate or understand at a teleological level, nonetheless at a cosmological level, in terms of the birth, foundation, and structure of the universe, nonetheless birth, foundation, and structure of the human being as a species or as a culture or as a technology or as an existential condition or situation. That this fallenness is what is inherited by I suppose I'll say the 2 centuries after Percy Shelley's death. It's the loss of the local shamanic or medicine ontos, the local religious ontos, which holds the ground of a human society which has not cratered and opened up into a global fracture of informational confusion, which is the fracture of the ontological ground, which we can no longer identify what information is true or meaningful or valuable, because there is no foundational understanding of what being is and does, how it acts in the world, what is its character, what is its nature, and thus what am I as a human being, or what am I as a phenomenon emergent in this aeonic process, this profoundly deep time historical process of creation itself. And what we see emerge, everything from Camus to Sartre to who else do I want to list here? These are existential responses. We could have Dostoevsky as a great example, or Chekhov. These are existential responses. Virginia Woolf is another great example. Existential responses, right? Human psychological nervous system level responses to the loss of ground, which is the cratering of modernity into specialized silos of information. These responses are occurring at the same time as the work of Max Planck, James Clerk Maxwell, Boltzmann. And Boltzmann's suicide is not an isolated incident. The problem that Boltzmann is working on is the same problem that Virginia Woolf is working on. It's a fracture of consciousness, and the essential race of science is not about a specific revolution in technology or specific revolution in maybe one domain of sight, but is the reunification of sight across Virginia Woolf and Boltzmann, which is to say an existential reunion of the human being with the ontos, which is the superstructure of creation itself. And the loss of that superstructure comes about precisely because of the introduction of high-resolution potentialities and possibilities, which is global modernity. Right? This is the restructuring of the organization and order of human societies around the world with World War I. This is the creation of the nation state. It is an enhanced understanding of what constitutes the human genome, and thus a series of misplaced and half-baked discussions on what the human genome means for humanity in terms of evolutionary viability, political status, what have you, right? This is profoundly a part of what occurs in the 20th century, including in Nazi Germany. An understanding that emerges as diverse and sophisticated as epigenetics, understanding the somatic condition of the human being as a nervous system process that is impacted not only by ancestral history, but the imminent lived experience of the organism. And that is information that translates into and through the genome. It is a informational capsule or crystal. And this is something that's very important to Schrödinger. These are the great minds of human history. And in a time such as now, there's the essential need for all minds to be great minds. And this is an educational issue. We've reached a point in human history where there is enough information in enough disciplinary fields to create the full picture. And what I wanted to say in creating a full picture is it is effectively a painting. It is a creative, imaginative act of unifying the disciplinary silos, reunifying them into a ontological healing, so to speak, which is a cosmogony of what has been made available by modernity, the fracture of modernity, this 2-century utter fracturing down to what are we, who are we, what is possible, what is life. And no coincidence, right? That's the key question for Schrödinger. The possibilities made available by the total depth of this scientific inquiry, right? Going into the absolute foundations, right? Advancing Newtonian physics into the energetic dimension via thermodynamics has availed us an understanding far beneath what appears to many eyes, right? But then we have Shelley and we have Hölderlin, who understand and see imminently this energetic dimension, just as Heraclitus understands and sees imminently this energetic dimension. Thus, his ontos is based on fire. And when I'm gesturing to Shelley or Hölderlin or Heraclitus, I'm saying there is a groundswell of the ontos which remains unbroken by scientific inquiry and the insurrection into the fabric of the world cosmogonies, right? And the fracture of world cosmogonies is that they're outmoded. They're becoming outmoded. You could think of them as philosophical or existential constitutions. These are cultural, they're religious, they're group-based, they're even individual-based in terms of what am I, what is the self, who am I, what am I doing in the world based on that presumption and how much of that information is presumption, and how much of that is a real measure of truth, which is founded in the function of the real. This returns us to my concept here of the operator identity, which is crucial because the real must remain real across all scales of being, because all that exists is ultimately reducible to a single force and phenomenon, which is the powerful combination of the origin of the universe, the creation of the universe from fire, which you could say is the Big Bang, which is an immense amount of energy, which is dispersing over time, which is the cooling universe, which creates complexity, diversity, from the elemental fields that are created and thrown off from stellar fusion. These are not only elemental fields, they're gravitational fields, right? because this is mass and space. So this is the loss, right? Because there's these different siloed disciplines or behaviors or ways of thinking or seeing which are exclusionary, because they for a period of time they had to be. Virginia Woolf or Dostoevsky or Nietzsche, they're doing psychological work or they're doing civilizational work. And Boltzmann and Maxwell and Einstein are doing cosmological or large physical work on how bodies in space operate and how energy moves through pseudo-closed systems, right? How energy dissipates. The life cycles of energies in different fields of information. And this is the loss at the deepest level. It's an existential separation of the humanities and the sciences, which was formerly unified only in Renaissance figures such as Goethe or Da Vinci or Shelley. Because there's this understanding that is explicit in the greatest minds in human history, that there is no separation between the deepest human intuition or felt sense of being and the literal totalizing function of being in space and in time. That movement or function of being is itself the identity of the operator, the thing that is across all scales, wherein there is no separation. And this is a profoundly religious question. This is the history of world religion. This is the question of world religion. What is God? So this is an educational, it's a paradigm shift fundamentally in education. It's how knowledge is communicated, how knowledge is siloed, and the importance of true transdisciplinary, I'll call it ontological thought, in the crisis of modernity. Because what the ultimate educational process needs to be in light of the information that modernity has revealed to this groundswell is a Renaissance transdisciplinary education toward the fundamental absolute question of what is the ontos of being. And from that place emerges a total power of not only individual function but group function to solve every problem that emerges downstream from the ontological systems level structural function of the universe itself, which is irreducible in terms of the creation of stars and the deepest inner psychological function and neurological function of mankind itself. And I've gone deeply into this in my work. Multiple studies, multiple deep texts that discuss this relationship. There's no need to continue that here. So this is a new moment in human history, and it's a kind of contrived or cliche statement at this point, after everything that has occurred in the past several decades. But it is a new moment not because of all of the shiny toys. It is a new moment because there has been sufficient depth created in every necessary disciplinary field, from neuroscience to astrophysics to human psychology to the advances of Prigoghine's dissipative structures, to Maxwell, to Schrödinger, to Cecilia Payne-Gapashian's work on the creation and essence of stars, what stars are made of, that we can unify that information into a total field systems, a dynamical field systems of the function of existence itself. And this is deeply tied to thermodynamics, which is probably the most important and profound advancement in human history. The understanding of how life moves through being, or heat moves through being, however you want to term it. So this is the project. And this is me suggesting here then that modernity is over. That the period of modernity, as far as I want to term it, begins with Percy Shelley and Shelley's death in the 1820s, and ends, we could say right around, we could make it a neat 200 years in 2020. I think 2020 revealed to us just how deeply global systems have been unified. And this is not just a practical physical condition of supply and distribution of information or goods and services. It's the digital Silk Road, so to speak, but also the transmission of information, as in viral information. How quickly viral information can spread. This is not only social media, but I'm talking about, again, physical virus. The unity of the globe has occurred not only physically, because this is something that is far deeper than one dimension. It is occurring ontologically. An ontological unification of the historical cosmogonies of every world religion, every world tradition, into this scientific abgrunding of the foundations of human history, this scientific abyssalization of the foundations of our formerly tribal and local societies, diagnosed by Nietzsche at the cusp of the 20th century, as a predication of World War I and World War II. The massive fracturing that becomes apparent, physically real, from the sensitivity of our great minds, which is to say our poets and our philosophers, such as Hölderlin, Nietzsche, and Shelley. From the sensitivity of this, very much so like a bird before a volcanic eruption, observing that the ground has been lost, that the myth has died, and it has died because the myth is now insufficient to the advancement of human consciousness. Shelley writes just moments before Darwin, right? Shelley writes just mere moments before Darwin. Shelley writes mere moments before Maxwell. Marx and Engels inherit Shelley in a direct way, profoundly direct way. Marx's wife and Engels himself are vested researchers and readers of Shelley. Why is this? We're dealing with the fracture that Shelley stands on the precipice of: global modernity. And that as much as global modernity appears to be a problem or a crisis, global modernity was a necessary deepening of the ontos. Humanity's awareness of the ontos, which is dedicated scientific inquiry into the foundations of being in every discipline: philosophy, science, psychology. This is a project that was occurring transpersonally, as in across the species, to create the necessary conditions and circumstances for an ontological reunion at the level of law, at the level of recognized, documented, as Shelley so frequently says and quotes, especially in his tracts on atheism, that Shelley himself is perhaps the most, you could say, God-fearing or deeply spiritual person of his time, because he is in search of the laws of truth, the laws of being, the laws of love, the laws of consciousness. This is what makes a scientist, a true scientist at depth, is in search of not only the law of one discipline, but the law of the universe, the law of being. And this, as Einstein says, he stands on the shoulders of Maxwell. This is precisely what history is and does, the function of history. Periods and epochs upon which it becomes possible to stand on the shoulders of someone else, and see something that was not previously able to be seen. So that's what I got. Thank you.